In 1943, a 17-year-old Swedish boy registered a company with money his father gave him as a reward. That reward? For being a good student. But here's what his father never knew, what history almost forgot, and what IKEA has spent decades trying to erase. That boy was a card-carrying member of a fascist movement, a Nazi sympathizer, and he went on to build the most profitable furniture empire in human history. Fasten your seatbelt and get ready. Welcome to Shadow Capital. IKEA is the fourth most visited website in the world. Not a social media platform, not Google, a furniture catalog. With over 470 stores across 62 countries and revenues topping $47 billion, IKEA isn't just a furniture company. It's one of the largest and most powerful corporate entities on Earth. And it has been built, deliberately, systematically, on three things. A founder with a past darker than any flat-pack instruction manual. A corporate structure so complex it makes tax authorities sweat. And a mythology so carefully crafted that most people still believe IKEA is just a quirky Swedish family business. It isn't. This is what's really behind those blue and yellow walls. Ingvar Kamprad was born in 1926 in Småland, one of the poorest regions in Sweden. He grew up watching his neighbors scrape by. That childhood obsession with poverty, with not wasting a single cent, would become the founding philosophy of IKEA. But it was also the perfect cover story. Because in 1942, as Europe burned, 17-year-old Ingvar Kamprad joined the Swedish National Socialist Party, Sweden's Nazi movement, led by a man named Per Engdahl. This wasn't a teenage mistake. It wasn't a brief flirtation with dangerous ideas. Kamprad remained active in that movement for years. He wrote letters to Engdahl as late as 1950, long after the world knew what Nazism had produced, long after the camps had been liberated, long after there was any excuse left to offer. He later called it, quote, the greatest mistake of his life. But here's the part that should make you pause. IKEA knew. His closest executives knew. And for decades, this information was buried. Not because it wasn't true, but because IKEA's entire brand rested on Kamprad being a beloved, harmless grandfather figure. The truth only surfaced in 1994 when a Swedish journalist uncovered the full extent of his involvement. By then, IKEA had already conquered the world. The furniture was real, the image was not. But let's go back further, because before the Nazi connections, before the billions, there was the original engine of IKEA's growth. Kamprad built his supply chain by systematically undercutting and then abandoning Swedish manufacturers. He would place enormous orders, enough to keep an entire factory running, and then, when he had squeezed the price low enough, he would move production to Poland, to lower-cost countries, to wherever labor was cheapest. Factories that had restructured their entire operations around IKEA's orders were left with nothing. One Swedish manufacturer described it like this: you'd build your entire business for them, and then one morning, the order was gone. This wasn't a flaw in IKEA's model. This was the feature, the engine, the reason your bookshelf cost $49. Kamprad had a phrase for it. He called it taking responsibility for costs. What his suppliers called it was different. Now let's follow the money. Here's a question most people never ask. Who actually owns IKEA? If you said the Kamprad family, you'd be wrong. IKEA is owned by a Dutch foundation called Stichting Inca Foundation, which controls a holding company called Inca Group, which operates the stores. But the IKEA brand, the name, the trademark, the blue and yellow logo on everything you own, that's owned by a completely separate company. A company called Inter IKEA Systems, based in the Netherlands, controlled by a trust in Liechtenstein. Are you keeping up? Because here's where it gets interesting. This structure means that every IKEA store in the world pays a royalty, a licensing fee, just to use the IKEA name. That fee flows to Inter IKEA, which flows to Liechtenstein, where it is taxed at near zero rates. The Economist estimated this structure saves IKEA hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes every single year. And it is completely legal, which is exactly the point. Because Kamprad didn't just build a furniture business, he built a legal architecture so complex that no single tax authority has been able to fully dismantle it. When Sweden became too expensive, with its high tax rates, Kamprad himself moved to Switzerland in 1973. He remained there for over 2 decades. The man who built Sweden's most famous brand chose not to live there and refused to pay taxes there. He was still beloved, still in the IKEA catalog, still smiling. Now let's talk about what happens every time you walk through those doors. Because the IKEA store is not a store. It is a carefully engineered customer experience, designed from the floor plan to the food court to influence how you spend. Let me walk you through it. First, the maze. Most retail stores let you move freely. You walk in, find what you need, you leave. IKEA is different. The store is built around a single winding path, what retail designers call a forced path layout. You cannot take a shortcut. You cannot go directly to what you need. You must pass through every single department: bedroom, kitchen, living room, children's section, lighting, storage, before you reach the exit. Every extra minute spent inside increases the likelihood of an unplanned purchase. This is documented retail science. Exposure time and buying behavior are directly linked. IKEA built its entire store architecture around this principle. Second, the showrooms. Before you reach the actual products, you walk through dozens of fully decorated room setups. Perfect living rooms, cozy bedrooms, functional home offices. These are not just displays. They are aspirational environments, designed to help you imagine a version of your life inside them. The lighting is warm. The plants are real. The books on the shelves are chosen to signal sophistication. You're not looking at furniture. You're being shown who you could become. Third, the restaurant. IKEA is one of the largest restaurant chains in the world. Most people forget this. The restaurant is not a convenience. It is a strategic part of the experience. Research shows that comfortable, well-fed customers make different purchasing decisions than rushed or hungry ones. The meatballs are not an accident. The cinnamon rolls are not an accident. The 50-cent hot dog at the exit is not an accident. Every element of the IKEA experience has been refined over decades to produce one result. You spend more. You feel good about it. You come back. Now here's where the story takes a turn that is almost too strange to believe. Because through all of this, the billions, the tax structures, the multiple corporate layers, Ingvar Kamprad lived like a man who genuinely could not afford to splurge. He flew economy class until his final years. He drove an old Volvo. He bought his clothes at flea markets. When he went to the IKEA canteen, he used the senior discount. His net worth was estimated at over $58 billion. He used coupons. And here's what makes this so revealing. While journalists wrote charming stories about the billionaire who ate cheap lunches, IKEA's corporate lawyers were engineering one of the most sophisticated tax structures in corporate history. The image of the humble man in economy class made the wealth seem almost irrelevant, made the corporate structure seem like an afterthought. It wasn't. Every story about Kamprad's second-hand clothes was a story that wasn't being written about where the money was actually going. Ingvar Kamprad died on January 27, 2018. He was 91 years old. The tributes poured in. Leaders praised him. The headlines called him a visionary, a genius, a man who democratized design. All of that is true, and so is everything else. The sympathies he carried into adulthood, the manufacturers he discarded, the tax empire he constructed while his country believed he was one of them. The corporate mythology built as carefully as any piece of furniture, every piece fitting together, every bolt tightened, nothing left to chance. IKEA today continues the structure he built, the foundation, the holding companies, the licensing fees, the royalties that flow quietly to the Netherlands. The stores are brighter than ever. The meatballs are still $1. And most people who walk through those automatic doors, past the arrows on the floor, never ask the one question that matters. Who built this place? And at what cost? The genius of IKEA isn't the furniture. It isn't even the price. It's the story. The carefully maintained image of a humble flat-pack revolution, started by a thrifty Swede who just wanted to give people a better life. That story is powerful. And like the best corporate stories, it contains just enough truth to make you stop questioning it. They built this empire in the open. They hid the architecture in plain sight. And they were counting on one thing: that you would never look closely enough to see it. Too late.